Hi, folks. This is a learning session and strategy discussion from Mark Herman's Empire of the Sun. The second edition is actually in the mail from GMT as we speak, and the folks at Advance After Combat, a board game geek guild, are getting ready for a live play tournament in a few weeks. A number of them will be joining me here, and since the tournament is using the popular 1943 scenario, we'll focus on that here. By way of quick background, Empire of the Sun is a one-map strategic-level card-driven game of the Pacific Theater. The one-year scenarios are playable in about 3 hours by experienced players, and the full war is actually quite a reasonable time commitment as well. It does have a reputation for being a little bit difficult to get into, which I would attribute to a couple of things. First, I think the mechanics clearly are quite different from a more typical war game. You definitely can't just set it up and start pushing counters. You've got to spend a bit of time either really understanding what's going on with the mechanics through digesting the rules, or get together with somebody who knows how to play the game who can show you. But second, I think it's also just a really deep game, and particularly for a game that's got so few units on the map at any one point in time. There's just a whole lot of stuff going on, and it's actually quite normal as a new player to get to a place where you are sort of feeling somewhat comfortable that you've digested the mechanics and have an idea of in theory, how the rules work, and then you look at your cards and you look at the map and the counters and you say, what the heck am I supposed to do with my units here? I really don't have any idea at all. It's normal, and again, it's because really of a combination of the fact that it's a bit of an unusual game, and it really is a deep game with a lot of things going on. There's just decisions and trade-offs everywhere. And so one of the goals for this session is to sort of help get through that hurdle. And we're not going to spend a lot of time diving into the rules in terms of sort of looking at the rule book and the structure of the rules and the structure of the mechanics. We will talk about it in the context of the 1943 scenario, and we'll in particular spend some time looking at the sequence of play in terms of an operation and how that works. And so you'll have a chance to get a feel for the rules here as we talk about play and talk about strategy, even though I'm not going to sort of dive in detail into the rule book. And hopefully by the time we're done here, you'll have some sense of why I think this is such an awesome game, and also at least be started down the path of feeling a little bit more comfortable that you have some idea of what to actually do with your units when you're playing in a game. All right, so let's start in here with the 1943 scenario, just talking a little bit about the victory conditions and the strategic situation for both sides. And the map we've got in front of us, by the way, is the 1943 scenario at start. For the Allies, and the Allies really are defending in the CBI and attacking in the Pacific, and the Japanese are doing the opposite. And that's one of the things that makes this a fun scenario, is that both sides get to attack and defend. And the forces are relatively balanced, at least in the beginning of the scenario, so it makes things pretty exciting. So the Allied goal is basically that defending in the CBI is to try and hold as much of North India as possible, and that really usually comes down to just Dhaka, which is this hex up here. And just to test, can everybody see when I move those units out of Dhaka and back? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So at least we know Vassal's working all right. So the Allies are defending in the CBI and they're attacking in the Pacific. And let's talk a little bit about the victory points in the Pacific. And one other, I guess, probably point that's worth making is that victory conditions in the one-year scenarios are based on victory points, which is a little different than the campaign game. And I'm not going to go into all the victory points, but I'll try and hit the ones that are sort of the major ones that show up in every 43 scenario game that you'll ever play, probably. So the first thing for the Allies in the Pacific is to make sure that you make progress of war. If you don't make progress of war, that translates to a political will loss, and in the scenario, that translates into victory points. So you really got to try and make progress of war every turn, which basically means taking four bases a turn. The other thing that's nice to do if you can is retaking Attu Kiska. So if you go up north here, I'll just move the counter around. That little Japanese brigade remnant up there is holding on to Attu Kiska. Okay, so again, Attu and Kiska, the Allies would love to try and retake it because basically the way political will works in the 43 scenario is really important to understand. The Allies start with their political will at 6, and at 6, that's -1 victory point. So victory points for the Jap are basically plus numbers for the Japanese and minus numbers for the Allies. So with the Allies at 6 political will, that's -1 off the Japanese victory points. If political will goes to 5, then the victory point swing goes from -1 to +1. So it's actually a 2 victory point swing if political will goes from +6 to +5. And then it's 1 more cumulative after that each time it goes down if it does. But generally, the big swing that you'll see in every game is going from 6 to 5. The Allies would love to try to retake Attu, but it's difficult. We'll come back and look at that as a potential operation, but it's tough to do. So the other places where the Allies can be on the offensive or want to be on the offensive in the Pacific are around the Mandates, meaning the Solomons, New Guinea, and also the Central Pacific, the Marianas, for bomber bases. Rabaul is really the key to the Solomons, and the way, if you've had a chance to look at the way national status works, most of the countries that can be conquered by Japan, so the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, Burma, Malaya, there are a small number of bases that, if captured, cause those countries to fall at the end of the turn. In the Solomons, the way it works is it's Rabaul and Guadalcanal. So at the beginning of the 43 scenario, Japan controls all the Solomons. The Allies have just retaken Guadalcanal. So in order to regain control of the Solomons, the Allies have to take Rabaul. Rabaul is extremely difficult to take because it's got an 1812 in there at the start. In a lot of games it won't be taken, but it's basically a 6 victory point swing because, again, it's a little weird, but the Japanese have 3 victory points at the beginning for having control of the Solomons. And if the Allies get control, it swings from +3 victory points to -3 victory points. So basically, it's a 6 victory point swing if the Allies can take Rabaul. So Rabaul is the single biggest hex, really, in the game from the Allies' perspective. After Rabaul, taking a bomber base is the next biggest opportunity because basically any port within 11 hexes of Tokyo is worth 3 victory points. And I should rephrase that. The Allies can only get 3 victory points once for 1 bomber base. It doesn't matter how many they take. So that would include things like Saipan or Ulithi or Palau, for example. Those are the 3 typical bomber bases that the Allies would go after, and that's worth 3 victory points. The Marshals are worth 3 victory points, and the Marshals basically are controlled by Eniwetok and Kwajalein. So that's 2 hexes that the Allies would have to take for 3 victory points there. Then resource hexes are worth 1 victory point each for as many resource hexes as the Allies can take. So Vogelkop is pretty typical in terms of one that the Allies might try to go for at the western end of New Guinea. Balikpapan or Tarakan over in Borneo are also likely candidates too. So those are additional victory points, 1 per hex. And then if we look at New Guinea, it's really hard to take control of all of New Guinea. I'm going to switch off the units for a second. Whoops, that's the wrong one. There we go. I just toggled off the units. So you can see that there's 6 ports in New Guinea. You have to control all 6 ports plus Vogelkop to take control of New Guinea. So usually what the Allies try to do is take 4 ports, because 4 ports are worth 1 victory point total. And as you can see, they already have Gili Gili and Port Moresby. So if they can take Leh and 1 other port, they'll have an extra victory point. Okay, and then in addition to getting a victory point for controlling 4 ports in New Guinea, the Allies can finally also get, if they don't manage to take Rabaul and therefore don't take all the Solomons, they can still get 1 victory point for controlling 4 bases in the Solomons. They've got 1 already with Guadalcanal, and if they can take 3 more, that's an extra victory point. So that's pretty much it in terms of the victory point options for the Allies in the Pacific. And actually, as you can see, there's quite a lot of them. So there's a lot of things the Allies can do. Switching over to the Japanese side real quickly, the Japanese are obviously trying to prevent the Allies from taking the locations in the Pacific that are worth victory points, but at the same time they're trying to get victory points of their own in the CBI. And specifically, they get 1 over there for having the Burma Road blocked, which it currently is. They also get a victory point for each of the hexes of North India, of which there are 5. So that's up to 5 victory points they can get there. And if you've had a chance to look at the India mechanics, basically there's this India table at the top, the status track, and once all of North India is conquered, the status track starts to move to the left like this. And at the end of the scenario, if it's either in unrest or strikes, that's a victory point for the Japanese. If it's in unstable or revolution, it's in revolt. It's worth 2 victory points for the Japanese. So between the 5 for holding all of North India and 2 more potentially for the status track, that's 7 victory points for the Japanese over here in the CBI, which is a lot. But it doesn't stop there, because they get another 5 if they can take China out of the war. And as you'll see on the China track here, we start in major in the major breakthrough space, and so it only takes 3 more swings down to the left to get China out of the war. So that's something that the Japanese are definitely thinking about as well. All right, so that's sort of the strategic situation and victory conditions for the scenario. Let's just do a really quick review of sort of where we are at the start of the game. So both sides are under ISR, which means that there's limitations in the sense, for example, that they can't move Army and Navy units in the same activation. That also limits Japanese ASPs to half their normal, although that tends not to be quite such a big issue at this point in the game. And ISR is a little different in the 1-year scenarios in the sense that you're allowed to play a 3 OC card to get out of ISR at any time. You can't do that in the campaign game, but in the 1-year scenarios, you can play a 3 OC card to get out of ISR at any point. The Japanese start with, there we go. Can you guys see that card now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good. Okay, so that is that's the Japanese future offensive, and if I flip this, Over here, toenails is the Allied future offensive, so those cards are sort of set aside in the FOQ at this point. And the other sort of starting condition to keep in mind is that Attu Kiska has been held already for 2 turns, and so the U.S. loses the political will point for the Japanese having held it for 3 turns if the U.S. can't retake it at the beginning of this first turn of the scenario. The other thing is both sides start with 7 cards. That means that the Allies are going to play first due to basically tied hand size. In 42, tied hand size initiative goes to the Japanese. In 43 and for the rest of the war, tied hand size initiative goes to the Allies. So that's pretty much it. So with that sort of as the background in terms of strategy and the victory conditions, let's take a look in this. There we go. So when I pop that open, I'm guessing you guys did not see the hand, the Allied hand pop open. So what I think I'm going to have to do, because probably most of you had to come in as observers, I'm going to put these cards out on the map, and then we'll take a closer look at them. But just walking through really quickly, so you can see first of all that there's 4 military event cards. Cartwheel, Tornado, Culverin, and Lilliput here. So 4 black military events, a blue reaction card, a green resource card, and a yellow political card. Let's just take a little bit more of a look at the typical military event. And actually, you'll notice that all these cards have in the upper left-hand corner a large number, right? So it's either a 3, a 2, or a 1. That's the OC value of the card. Every card has an OC value. And then if you look at a typical military event like Operation Cartwheel, if you just mouse over it, every one of those will show you which HQ it can activate. And sometimes it's any HQ, like Cartwheel and Tornado Task Force are both any HQ, but Culverin, for example, is only a joint or a Commonwealth HQ, which would be SEAC or ANZAC. And then Lilliput can only be activated by Southwest. So there are sometimes HQ restrictions for the military events. If you go back again and look at Cartwheel, let's say, every military event typically has a logistics value. It's most commonly higher than the OC value, although in a few cases it's not, but it's generally higher than the OC value. And it's really common, if you look at Cartwheel there, you'll see that it says 6 for U.S. Southwest Pacific and 4 for all others. So it's pretty typical that cards that can be used by any HQ have one HQ that does better with the card than the others. If you look at Tornado Task Force, that's an example of a bonus. Some of the military events have bonuses on them. This one basically allows MacArthur, if he's under ISR, to essentially scrape together a little bit of a naval force to support an operation. If you look at Culverin, that's actually got an example of a condition. Some military events have conditions that apply. In this case, only Commonwealth units can be activated. And Lilliput also has a condition. So anyway, those are sort of 4 different military event cards. The skip bombing attack here, as we look at the overall hand for the turn, the skip bombing attack has got several interesting things about it. First of all, it's a reaction card, so you play it in reaction. And the primary use of it is actually to reduce the Japanese ASPs by 1. But it's also got this bonus associated with it that does some damage to units that are moving if they move within range of Allied air. But the other things to notice, at the very bottom of the card, it says two things. In black bold, it says draw one strategy card, and in red, it says remove from play if used as an event. So this is an example both of if you play this card as a reaction card for the event, you get to draw one strategy card when you play it, but you also have to remove it from play at that point if you use it as an event. PT Boats works the same way. You get to draw a strategy card for it, but you also have to remove it from play. And then the Sextant Conference is another remove from play as well. So just looking at those cards, there's a bunch of things that we could do with them. Let's talk for a minute about sort of three different operations, because I think it's worth, before we look closely at the Japanese cards, it's worth talking a little bit about potential early operations for the Allies. So let's go over to the CBI, and what I actually want to do is I want to steal Toenails and bring it with us, because that's potentially a card that we could use in the CBI here. And just magnifying a little bit, and there we go. And I'm going to click to better show what units are here. Okay. Let's use this as an opportunity to talk a little bit about the ground supply rules. The supply rules in general are pretty straightforward. You trace from an ultimate supply source, which are either the cities in Japan or the map edges for the Allies. You trace from an ultimate supply source to the HQ, and then the HQ throws supply, and to the HQ can be unlimited, but from the HQ to the unit is limited by the range of the HQ that's on the HQ counter. So for example, down here looking at South HQ, it has a range of 12. And supply is usually pretty simple because an awful lot of units are on the coast, and so basically you're tracing supply over water to the unit on the coast, and in that case really the only thing that gets in the way is an enemy air zone of influence if it's not neutralized. But when you start tracing supply on ground, things get a little more complicated. So if we look, for example, at let's look at the Japanese guys here. If we're tracing supply from the South HQ, I can pull up, if I hit Control-C, it brings up the activation and supply radius of the HQ that you can see there. So anything within 12 hexes is technically within supply unless there's something that's blocking it. And that's 12 hexes. It's traced as hexes, not movement points. So clearly the Japanese units up here are within that radius, but the ground supply rule is that if the last hex side that's crossed to get supply to the unit is a land hex side rather than a sea hex side, then there's an extra requirement that kicks in, and it's the ground logistic rule. And it basically says that in addition to tracing that normal, in this case 12 hex range from south, that the unit also has to be able to trace a 4 movement point supply trace, either from the original HQ, which in this case is not possible because it's more than 4 movement points, or from a supply eligible port, which Rangoon qualifies as here. So if you look at Rangoon, tracing from Rangoon, for example, to the 2012 up here, because this is a transport route, it costs basically 1 movement point to get up to where the 1812 is, and then actually another half into there, so he's well within the 4 movement point range. So what it does is, and this is one of the changes in the rules from the original supply rules, and it's probably the biggest single change. In fact, the only really big change in the new rules. But it makes Rangoon really important for the Japanese in their conquest of the CBI. And in this case, they've already got Rangoon, obviously, because it's early 1943. But what happens is that Mandalay also becomes quite important because it's sort of the center of all these strategic routes. And just also to sort of show you all the little details, there are 3 hexes that are special in the sense that they have strategic routes that need to be built. There's this Jarhat hex where at the beginning of the 43 scenario, the strategic route has already been built. And then there's the Impala Kohima hex where you can see the little red dotted lines. That symbolizes that the strategic route hasn't been built yet in this scenario. And over here in Lido, you can also see that the strategic route hasn't been built yet. So you basically, as the Allies, you have to control North India and spend a 3OC to build each of those. So at this point, Impala Kohima and Lido, those 2 hexes are both mixed terrain and they cost 2 movement points. And you can't benefit from the strategic route there because it hasn't been built yet. So logistics starts to get a little complicated with these new rules in the CBI, and so it's something to definitely pay attention to.